Hello again everyone, and welcome back. My name is Esero, and in this video I'm excited to introduce my take on the cast on critical strike Cyclone Assassin, a powerful and chaotically destructive build that dual wields two Cospris Malices, allowing us to automatically cast an entire swarm of cold-based spells on critical strikes, causing us to both clear impressively fast and slaughter bosses, even in the highest tiers of maps. We can also tank some serious damage with an 8,000 plus effective life pool, utilizing a high level steel skin that casts automatically when we take damage. And with the power of acrobatics, phase acrobatics, and elusive, combined with an occasional Vol Grace at key moments, we'll be maxing out both our attack and our spell dodge chance at 75% very consistently. The build primarily functions through channeling Cyclone and hitting enemies with critical strikes. And when the build is performing optimally, we'll have a 95.5% chance to crit with Cyclone, meaning that multiple times a second we'll be triggering an entire lineup of cold-based spells. These spells will cast automatically and include two different triggers of Ice Nova, and a single trigger each of Frostbolt, Frostbite, and Frost Bomb. Each of those spells will be automatically cast when we critical strike with Cyclone. And we also have the opportunity to manually cast Vol Ice Nova, which creates a series of explosions that spread to nearby enemies, clearing massive packs in just an instant. The Ice Novas are the main source of damage in the build, and the other cold spells exist to enhance the lethality and range of those Novas. Any spell that is autocast typically triggers from the location of our character. However, our Ice Novas can trigger off nearby Frostbolt projectiles, giving us a huge boost to our clear speed. We'll also be automatically casting the Curse, Frostbite, in a massive area around our character, which at high levels causes our enemies to have up to minus 45% to their cold resistance. And in a very similar manner, we'll be utilizing Frost Bomb to inflict cold exposure upon our enemies, giving them another minus 25% to their cold resistance, with both combined reducing our enemies' cold resistance by up to 70%, greatly improving our damage potential. We're going to be wrapping all this offensive capability into the Ascendancy Assassin, which received substantial changes in the recent 3.8 Blight patch, which most notably grants us the node Mistwalker, giving us convenient and consistent access to the buff Elusive, which at its base level provides us with 20% chance to dodge spell and attack hits, and 40% increased movement speed. However, this is a decaying buff, which means that it begins at its highest level of effectiveness and slowly drops in effectiveness until it hits 0%, reducing the buff it grants you as its duration goes on. Mistwalker grants us 25% increased effective elusive, which means that elusive will begin at 125%, meaning that at its very peak, it will begin at 125%, granting us 25% chance to dodge spell and attack hits and 50% increased movement speed, and it will decline further from there. As soon as elusive goes away, we can regain it again, meaning that we'll almost always have a version of elusive up, but the amount of benefit we're gaining from it will not be consistent. What is consistent, however, are the other benefits that Mistwalker grants us when elusive is up. We gain 20% increased attack and cast speed, 8% reduced damage taken, and we take no extra damage from critical strikes. This makes us essentially immune to critical strike damage and is such a huge defensive bonus that it cannot be understated, improving our survivability drastically. Assassin also gives us access to Unstable and Deadly Infusion, giving us consistent power charges and a huge bonus to our critical strike chance and multiplier, as well as more movement speed. And utilizing Opportunistic grants us even more movement speed, more damage, and reduced damage taken, depending on the type of enemies that are nearby. All of this raw power, movement speed, and elusiveness makes us extremely deadly, and with our cast on critical strike setup and our Cospris Malices, we'll be unleashing a devastating swath of cold spells upon our enemies, making for a smooth and satisfying build that crushes and shatters everything it comes up against. Let's get right into the gear choices that make this possible. As with previous build videos, I will not be using many direct chaos-based prices, and instead will be using tiers of price. Those tiers being cheap, 0 to 20 chaos, moderate being 21 to 100 chaos, and expensive being anything over 100 chaos in price. And I do this in an effort to represent these prices as accurately as possible, because in Path of Exile, the price of items is at the mercy of supply and demand. As such, specific unique item recommendations that I make in this build video may see some price shift after the video's release. But if you're watching this in a future league, you should be good to go. Check the video description for any build changes, updates, or clarifications post-launch. Full timestamps for every section of the build guide and each individual gear selection are also available down below. That said, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll begin with our weapon selection. With my first and foremost recommendation going to be dual wielding 2 Cospris Malices. Cospris Malice is extremely strong and grants us benefits that we can't get anywhere else, meaning that it is just about required for you to be running at least one of these if you're on a budget, but I'm recommending 2 for this build. Each one of these at the time of recording will set you back moderate expense, but is well worth it. The sword really does it all offensively, granting us a huge chunk of added cold damage and additional added cold damage to spells. When playing a cast on critical strike based character, you have 2 different primary components. You have the attack skill, which is the trigger for the spells, in this case being Cyclone, and you have the spell or spells that Cyclone's critical strikes trigger. Cyclone's entire purpose within the build is to hit as many enemies as possible and to crit them as much as possible. Cyclone does a great job of this, hitting all nearby enemies repeatedly as you channel the skill through them. The more critical strikes we hit, the more spells we automatically cast, with each individual cast on critical strike setup able to cast a spell every 0.15 seconds. 1 from our chess piece setup, and 1 from each of our Cospris Malices, automatically as we Cyclone through our enemies. Thus, we want to only focus on increasing the area of effect of Cyclone and its critical strike chance to just simply be hitting as many crits as possible, with our entire DPS-based focus being on the spells that it triggers instead. Cospris Malice does a great job at this, with a fast attack speed and increased critical strike chance against chilled enemies. It also grants us some crit multiplier and a massive chunk of added cold damage and added cold damage to spells. But its defining feature is going to be that it triggers a socketed cold spell on melee critical strike. This allows us to trigger additional skills like extra Ice Novas, Frost Bolts, Frost Bites, and Frost Bombs, all from the Cospris Malices that we wield, all of which provide us with additional damage, damage boosts, and utility that support our main cast on critical strike setup we have in our chess piece, which is a super powered Ice Nova. When we hit those melee critical strikes, each Cospris Malice triggers spells independently, and if there are 2 cold spells socketed within a Cospris Malice, it will alternate between the 2, meaning that we can have Frost Bomb and Frost Bite, both connected to an increased area of effect in 1 Cospris, and every 0.15 seconds, if we crit, it will trigger one of those 2 spells, flip-flopping between the 2, with the end result being that we curse our enemies with Frostbite, inflict them with elemental exposure, trigger extra Ice Novas, and send out Frostbolt projectiles for both of our Ice Novas to trigger on. Running 2 Cospris is really fun, flexible, and gives us a ton of additional power, and is my first and foremost recommendation. However, here are a few alternatives for budget options, shields, and alternative weapons that you can use if you're looking to just pick up 1 Cospris. And we'll discuss first the shield alternatives, one of which being the Light Lunaris Jingling Spirit Shield. Available for moderate expense, it provides us with a lot of different benefits, providing our spells with extra damage, cold damage, crit chance, and a lot of crit multiplier, all of which we really need, as well as giving us a big chunk of energy shield and a very good chance to block as high as 33%. A fantastic alternative all around for the build, both offensively and defensively. Additionally, in the shield category, you can look for a rare spirit shield, with the primary focus being on getting a very high life roll, and to a much lesser extent increasing the amount of energy shield that it provides, and getting as many elemental resistances as you can stack. Offensively, you can also look for stats such as increased critical strike chance for spells, increased cold damage, percentage chance to deal double damage, increased spell damage, and +1 to level of all cold spell skill gems. If you're going this route, the Spirit Shield can be as flexible offensively or defensively as you like. Find a balanced shield that fits your needs and your budget. And finally, if you don't want to be running a shield, but you want to pick up a second weapon to replace that other Cospris, you can go with a sword like this. And you're going to be looking for stats such as added cold damage, damage penetrates percentage of cold resistance, percentage increased spell damage, and any crit multiplier based rolls you can find. These type of weapons will need to be multi-mod crafted and are not going to be cheap. This is a route only available to those with a very high budget and will be quite expensive. With all that covered, I think it's time that we move on to the helmet selection for the build. This slot is going to be ridiculously flexible and you can use whatever you see fit here, but I've got a few recommendations that I'll go through right now. The first is going to be a rare helm and can have whatever base type you want. We're going to be looking for the following stats: a very high life roll, percentage increased maximum life, as many resistances as you can find, additional high rolls on strength, intelligence, or dexterity, and a very key stat if you're going with a rare helm is going to be nearby enemies have -X percentage to cold resistance. The rare helm is a fantastic option all around, but is mainly used for defense, and is available at a flexible price, whatever suits your budget. I also have a couple of alternative unique helmet options that will serve the build very well. Both of these are available for quite cheap, with the first option being a Devoto's Devotion. With this build, we need as much dexterity and intelligence as we can get because we need a lot to run our swords. Devoto's gives us a gigantic chunk of dexterity and increases our movement speed, which is huge because this build is constantly channeling Cyclone. The more movement speed we have, the faster we can move and clear maps. Devoto's also provides us with some small layers of defense, but is primarily a utility and offensive based option. We also have the ever-present Starkanja's Head Silken Hood, which also grants us that huge burst of dexterity, some critical strike chance, and a big boost to our life, and also provides us with some minor but very nice evasion-based bonuses. This is a well-rounded and balanced option, providing us with a little bit of everything. And with that covered, let's talk about the helmet enchants that will benefit the build the most. I have 3 primary recommendations, one for each of 3 different skills the build utilizes. The first being percentage increased Ice Nova damage, up to 40%. The second being percentage increased Frostbite Curse effect, up to 30%. And the third being the Steel Skin buff can take percentage increased amount of damage, up to 45%. Each of these enchants either increasing our damage, further reducing our enemy's cold resistance, or increasing the amount of damage that our Steel Skin buff can take, expanding our effective life pool and allowing us to take more incoming damage. The Ice Nova enchantment will increase the cost of the helmet you're looking to pick up into the expensive category. However, the other 2 enchantments are quite flexible and can be found for very cheap. It is worth noting that a helmet enchantment for this build is far from required, and you do not have to pick up anything in particular or anything at all. In all the clips you saw running high tiers of maps, Shaper, and Guardians, I ran no helmet enchantment. It is not required, but it can be picked up at your leisure and according to your budget for an extra boost to the build. And with that, we're going to move swiftly on to the body armor selection for the build, with my primary choice being a Carcass Jack Varnished coat. We are running almost entirely area of effect based skills, so Carcass Jack scales that incredibly well. It grants us up to 50% increased area of effect and up to 50% increased area damage, as well as providing us with some much needed life, energy shield, and elemental resistances. It is just a really well-rounded option that provides the build with everything it needs, and is available 6-linked for an expensive cost, but can be picked up unlinked for very cheap. For those of you on a strict budget, you can pick up an unlinked Carcass Jack for as cheap as you can get, along with a Jeweler's Touch Prophecy, which is also available for very cheap. You can then use a single Jeweler's Orb to instantly make that Carcass Jack a 5-link. This will get you mapping quickly and cheaply, earning money that you can put towards that future 6-link. I really do recommend using the Carcass Jack for this build. However, there are a few fantastic alternative options that I would like to cover. The first of which is going to be a Lore Weave, which gives us a huge variety of stats that are beneficial to the build. A well-rolled example will most notably give us a boost to critical strike chance, elemental damage, life, and energy shield, and gives us a very nice defensive boost by increasing our elemental resistances to as high as 78%. This can be picked up unlinked for moderate cost and is another great candidate to combine with Jeweler's Touch, and to get fully 6-linked will indeed be expensive. Another alternative is going to be the hyper defensive Belly of the Beast full worm scale. It grants us a gigantic chunk of life, resists and increases how fast we recover life with flasks pretty drastically. A phenomenal option, and one that can be picked up for very cheap unlinked, and of course is great to combine with Jeweler's Touch for that instant 5-link. If you want to get the 6-linked though, it is going to be, once again, expensive. Finally, you can also choose to go for a rare chest piece. If you do this, you're going to want to try to stack as much life, percentage increased maximum life, elemental resistances, and attributes as possible. But if you're going this route, you're going to want to look very heavily for a couple of stats that are going to be quite expensive. The first being socketed attacks have -15 to total mana cost, and the second being attacks have plus X percentage up to 1.5% to critical strike chance. The reduced mana cost is less important, but will make Cyclone free, removing any mana concerns, and the second will give your attacks additional base crit chance, meaning that Cyclone will be critting much more often, which is a huge boost to the build. The rare chess piece is not a budget recommendation from me. It is instead targeted towards those who have a reasonably sized budget and can afford to pick up an expensive version of this chess piece, one that features at the very least additional crit chance to attacks. And finally, for those who are on a hyper small budget, I'll be recommending these two different ways to pick up a 6-link very early that can get you mapping. It will not be a great chess piece, but it will get you by until you can earn additional currency. The first option is going to be a Tabula Rasa, available on the very low end of moderate. Tabulas are a guaranteed 6-link with all white sockets. White sockets can have any color of gems put into them, making this perfect for testing out new builds and for leveling, as they can be used from level 1 on. And the second alternative to get a cheap 6-link is going to be going to pathofexile.com/trade, selecting body armor, 6 links, 3 green, 3 blue, and selecting your buyout price as just chaos orbs. The results you'll be presented with are going to be a series of 6-linked chess pieces that are often corrupted and feature the exact colors that we need for this build. The majority of these should be on the low end of moderate, just like the Tabula, but feature actual stats that give you a little bit of a boost to the build. But being picky with these is not advised. If you can get any life, resists, or attributes here that are helpful to the build, it's going to be a good item for you. Keep in mind that if it's corrupted, you cannot change the socket colors or the stats, and it'll be permanently the exact way that it appears right now. Also be wary and check the item level requirement and the attribute requirements, and make sure that this is something that you can equip either right away or reasonably soon. And with that, I believe it's time that we move on to the glove slot. And I've got 2 primary recommendations depending on the needs of your build, with the first selection being the Command of the Pit Riveted Gloves. These grant us additional maximum life as well as 1 to 2 abyssal sockets. These can be picked up for cheap with 1 abyssal socket and for moderate expense with 2. Either way, you'll want to be socketing into it a Hypnotic Eye Jewel. This gives us constant access to the buff Arcane Surge, which grants us a variety of benefits, but most notably gives us 10% more spell damage, giving us a substantial boost to our DPS. The gloves also give us that opportunity to add Hypnotic Eye Jewels to the build, giving us access to beneficial stats such as additional life, energy shield, added cold damage to spells, and additional critical strike multiplier. These gloves are essentially a mere reflection of Tomb Fists that just have a little bit different functionality. They're very strong and very flexible, and I highly recommend them. The alternative to these is going to be picking up a pair of rare gloves. The base here is quite flexible, but ideally you'll be looking for fingerless silk gloves for the increased spell damage implicit. As always with rare items, you're going to be looking for high rolls in life, elemental resistances, and attributes. And there are a variety of damage-based modifiers that you can look for on these gloves. Some of these will be crafted, and some will be naturally rolled. You'll be looking for percentage increased damage with hits against chilled enemies, percentage increased damage during any flask effect, percentage increased critical strike chance, increased area of effect, and percentage increased elemental damage if you've dealt a critical strike recently. These gloves can fit a very flexible roll and have a very flexible price accordingly. If you're looking to go this route, pick up one that fits your budget. And with that said, let's go ahead and hop right into the boots, with my primary selection being a rare boot. And of course, once again, this has a flexible price and can fit your budget. The optimal base is going to be a 2-tone base that has an implicit that improves your elemental resistances. But any type of boot will work just fine. Here are the key stats you'll be looking for. As per usual, we're going to want a very high life roll, as many resists as we can get, and a high movement speed value, looking for at least 25 or 30% increased movement speed. Other key stats to look for are going to be percentage chance to dodge attack or spell hits. And a truly fantastic one to have is going to be percentage increased cooldown recovery speed, up to 15%. This affects our cooldown recovery times universally, impacting Withering Step, Steel Skin, Flame Dash, and even our cast on crit setups, causing them to cast spells a little bit more frequently. A really nice stat to have for those with the budget, but is far from required. Any solid rare pair of boots that has a number of these stats and benefits your build will serve you just fine. With that covered, let's talk about what kind of boot enchantments you'll want to be looking for when buying a pair of boots, or what kind of enchantments to hope for when you enchant your own. Here are some of the best enchantments for the build, the first of which being adds up to 45 to 68 cold damage if you've been hit recently, up to 10% increased movement speed if you haven't been hit recently, up to 80% chance to avoid being stunned if you've killed recently, damage penetrates up to 10% of enemies' elemental resistances if you haven't killed recently. Each of these options do really fantastic things for the build and improve its utility, its speed, or its damage. Each of these enchantments will have an extremely variable price on the cost of the boot, and once again can be picked up completely based upon your budget. My two primary recommendations would be to either get the added cold damage or the chance to avoid being stunned. Next up is going to be our amulet selection for the build. We're going to have two different selections here. One is going to be hyper budget focused and the other is going to be quite expensive. First up is going to be picking up a rare amulet. This has a very flexible price and has a variety of stats you can choose to look for. First and foremost, all the standard fare: life, energy shield, resistances, and attributes. But offensively, we can look for additional stats such as percentage increased spell damage, percentage increased cold damage, added accuracy rating, percentage increased movement speed, damage penetrates X percentage of elemental resistances, percentage increased area of effect, and percentage increased critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier as well. Any of these mods will fit the build very well and give it some much needed boosts. And for those of you with a very high budget, my top recommendation is going to be picking up a Pandemonious Jade Amulet. This thing will be quite expensive, but is an absolute beast at what it does. It grants us some much needed dexterity, increases our cold damage, and even gives us cold resistance. But the item's true power allows us to penetrate 20% of the enemy's cold resistance when they're chilled, and blinds those same chilled enemies on hit, causing them to receive a debuff, lowering their chance to hit by 50%. In almost every situation, the enemy will be chilled, so we'll almost always be penetrating the 20% resistances and blinding them on hit, making it far more likely for us to avoid being hit and also drastically increasing the damage we do. If all that wasn't enough, when we are hit by an enemy, we apply on that enemy a powerful chill, reducing their action speed by 30%, which is a drastic reduction to the speed at which they can perform any action. Pandemonious really does it all. It's powerful offensively, defensively, and gives us a lot of huge benefits, and I could not recommend it more highly to those with a very large budget. But whichever route you go, you're going to be wanting to anoint your amulet, so let's talk about the best options that we have available for this build. I'll be covering some choices in the cheap, the moderate, and the expensive categories. First up is going to be cheap, and in here we have Divine Judgment. For a black, a teal, and a sepia, you'll be looking at about a 5% DPS boost to your Ice Novas. Next up, in the moderate category, we're going to have Profane Chemistry. For a silver, a black, and a verdant. This will grant you a nice boost to maximum life, increase the amount of life that you recover from your flasks, and also increase the effect of all of your flasks, which is a really nice bonus to have. Also in the moderate category is going to be Fatal Blade for an opalescent, and an amber. You'll only want to use this if you are in desperate need of additional critical strike chance for your Cyclone. Beyond that, it does not benefit the build in any other meaningful way. And finally, we have a couple of options in the expensive category that are going to serve the build extremely well. And my highest recommendation for the build in general is going to be picking up Heart of Ice for a gold, an opalescent, and a crimson. This grants us a big bonus to our cold damage, causes our damage to penetrate even more cold resistance, and even causes us to leech a small amount of cold damage as energy shield, which is a nice defensive bonus. This will increase our Ice Nova DPS by around 8.4%. And a couple remaining options for those with very large budgets being Constitution for a gold, and a silver for our biggest possible life gain, and Whispers of Doom for a gold, and a black. If you go for this, you're going to want to run the Frostbite setup that I have in this build, as well as perhaps picking up an Assassin's Mark ring or getting Oscar Nubuck gloves to apply Assassin's Mark and Frostbite to our enemies. But again, this is only available to people who have a very high budget. And with the anointments covered, I think it's time that we discuss the rings. And for the first slot, I'm going to be recommending a Mark of the Shaper Opal ring. These are fortunately available for cheap and give us a lot of really nice benefits. It grants us a big chunk of increased maximum energy shield and life, as well as giving us a bit of lightning damage that we don't need badly, but doesn't hurt. It also provides us with some flat elemental damage and triggers volatile anomalies on kill 20% of the time. Shaper orbs will spawn, track nearby enemies, explode, dealing cold damage, and leave behind an area of effect that deals damage over time to enemies that pass over it. It's a helpful effect, but not one that we rely upon to do anything in particular. It just helps out with clearing up packs and dealing extra damage on occasion. But the main draw of the ring is the up to 80% increased spell damage if your other ring is an Elder item. This simply means that our other ring needs to have an Elder base, and we'll be getting access to that huge spell damage bonus, which is much needed. And thus, for our second ring slot, we're going to want an Elder base. This can be an Elder version of any of the normal base types, but ideally we're going to look for a Coral ring, a ring that has implicit resistances, or if you've got the money, you can pick up an opal or vermilion ring. We're going to be looking for a variety of stats on this ring, so get whatever you can afford. The price here will be very flexible. Of course, look for high life, resists, and attributes you need. Additionally, look for stats such as percentage increased damage, percentage increased cold damage, added cold damage, additional accuracy rating, critical strike chance or multiplier, and extra energy shield as well. And a final alternative to both of these options is going to be a Circle of Fear synthesized sapphire ring. These roll a variety of stats, but to make this worth it, you're going to need to have a very high budget and pick up a version that has percentage increased cold damage while affected by Herald of Ice, and Herald of Ice has percentage increased buff effect. Rings with those two mods specifically make this an extremely powerful option and the highest possible DPS that we can get it in the ring slot, granting us the additional cold damage, making Herald of Ice give us more cold damage, and causing Herald of Ice to deal more damage. If you've got the cash, pick up 2 of these with those exact mods on them. But my primary recommendation will be that Mark of the Shaper combined with an Elder Ring. And with that stated, let's move on to the final core piece of gear, the belt. With my first and foremost recommendation being a rare belt, either a Stygian Vise or a leather belt. The Stygian will be a fair bit more expensive, but will also be much more powerful due to the inclusion of an Abyssal socket. However, both of these belts can be picked up for a flexible price that suits your budget. Regardless of the base, you'll of course be looking for tons of life and resistances, additional energy shield, as well as percentage increased elemental, cold, and generic damage. Those modifiers are going to be the primary focus of the belt, but there are some other key stats that you can look for, such as increased cooldown recovery speed and increased spell damage during any flask effect. You can also look for some flask-based modifiers, such as increased flask charges gained, reduced flask charges used, or flasks supplied to you have increased effect. Once again, the world is your oyster here, so pick up whatever you can find that fits your budget and serves your version of the build very well. And with that said, the primary gear choices are complete, and it's time to discuss the flasks that fuel the build. First and foremost, we need movement speed, so we're going to be picking up a Quicksilver Flask of Adrenaline. This grants us an additional movement speed roll on top of the movement speed it already provides, up to a total of 70% increased movement speed, and for the secondary effect, I would recommend looking for the increased effect version of the flask. This can be a little bit more expensive and gives you a shorter but more potent burst of speed. Or if you're looking for a cheaper version, go for one that has increased duration or increased flask charges gained. Regardless of what you choose, you should be able to pick up a Quicksilver Flask for somewhat cheap. For our second selection, we're going to be utilizing the Cinder Swallow Flask. This flask inherently provides us with Onslaught, giving us 20% increased attack speed and 20% increased movement speed. It also grants us additional life, mana, and energy shield recovery on kill. It also has a varied additional stat at the very bottom. We're going to be looking for the percentage increased critical strike chance during flask effect, up to 80%. Giving us a huge bonus to our critical strike chance for both our Cyclone and for our spells. When trying to get a crit version of this flask, it can reach into the moderate expense category. If you're looking for something cheaper, either pick up a different version of this flask, or pick up a Wise Oak as an alternative. Wise Oak grants us additional elemental resistances, causes us to take reduced damage of our lowest elemental resistance, and also causes us to penetrate up to 15% of the enemy's elemental resistance for whatever resistance of ours is highest. So if you choose to use this flask, you want to make sure that your uncapped cold resistance is the highest, so you penetrate the enemy's cold resistance when you're using this flask, but ideally you'll want to balance all 3 of your uncapped elemental resistances to be completely even, so you take 10% reduced damage of each element and penetrate up to 15% of each element's resistance. That being said, it's time to move on to our third slot, which will contain its Ziri's Promise. Another very cheap option that will cause us to gain up to 15% of our elemental damage as extra chaos damage during effect. It also grants us a big chunk of chaos resistance and causes us to leech some of that chaos damage that it's giving us as life during the flask effect. This flask gives us really nice bang for the buck and provides us with a great bonus offensively and defensively. For our fourth slot, we're going to be looking for a Diamond Flask. The Diamond Flask is arguably the most important flask we have in the build. It causes our critical strike chance to become lucky, meaning that it rolls twice to see if we crit and then takes the highest roll. This drastically increases our effective critical strike chance in all situations. And to go along with that powerful effect, you're going to want to have either immunity to bleeding and removes bleeding on use, or provides you with immune to freeze and chill and removes freeze and chill on use. You should be able to pick up a flask like this for cheap. And for the final slot, we're going to want a Divine Life Flask. and you'll want to pick up whichever mod you didn't get on the Diamond Flask. If you don't have the immunity to bleeding, pick it up now on the Life Flask, or if you didn't get the immunity to freeze, pick it up right here. I also like to recommend picking up either a fully instant recovery or a partially instant recovery flask to allow you to gain some benefit off of it immediately. But any solid additional mod will serve you just fine, and you should be able to pick up these for very cheap. And with that covered, it's time to do a quick stop on the jewels before moving into the skills and links of the build. This build uses an interesting little variety of jewels. You're going to have about 5 sockets available, plus as many abyssal sockets as your belt and your gloves will allow you, potentially as many as about 8 sockets. You're going to want to be picking up a single, hyper cheap, Frozen Trail Cobalt Jewel. We use this to cause our automatic Frostbolt trigger to fire additional projectiles and move just a little bit quicker, improving its usefulness. We're also going to want a single Tempered Mine Cobalt Jewel in exactly this spot. You can get these for very cheap, and it grants us a very necessary boost to our accuracy. This jewel granting us 125 to accuracy rating per 10 intelligence on specifically unallocated passives in its radius. In the spot I selected, with the tree as it stands, we'll be gaining 1000 accuracy rating, taking our Cyclone from hitting 89% of the time up to a 99% hit chance. We'll also be filling out any abyssal sockets that we have in the build with Hypnotic Eye Jewels. As previously discussed, you'll want to be looking for high rolls of Life, Energy Shield, added cold damage to spells while dual wielding, and Critical Strike Multiplier. The main focus should rest on those mods specifically, but other helpful stats include additional elemental resistances, percentage increased damage if you killed recently, and damage penetrates X percentage of enemy elemental resistances if you haven't killed recently. And for those additional sockets that we have left in the tree that aren't taken up with anything, you're going to want to put in regular jewels, Cobalt, Viridian, Crimson, whatever you can get your hands on that have the following mods. With these jewels, you'll be primarily looking for 2 stats, percentage increased maximum life, and different varieties of Critical Strike Multiplier. For this build, we can utilize a huge variety of mods, including generic Global Critical Strike Multiplier and Global Critical Strike Multiplier with cold skills, elemental skills, with spells, with one-handed melee weapons, and while dual wielding. Your best bet will be to try to get 2 Critical Strike Multipliers of some variety and also get that maximum life roll. Additional stats to look for if you're on a budget or if you're looking for a 4th mod will be any percentage increased damage rolls, additional resistances, or additional critical strike chance. These jewels have a flexible price tag, but can often get quite expensive for very good examples. And finally, for our very last slot of gear, budget permitting, you'll be picking up a Watcher's Eye Prismatic Jewel. And for this build, we're going to want to focus primarily on picking up hatred-related modifiers. The prices on Watcher's Eyes can vary quite drastically depending on what mod you want to go for. Pick up whatever your budget permits. This item is not required, but gives us a fantastic bonus. For the hatred mods, we're going to primarily be looking for adds up to 70 to 104 cold damage, adds 1.2 to 1.8% to base critical strike chance, damage penetrates 10 to 15% cold resistance, and 40 to 60% increased cold damage. Any of these are really good options, so pick up whatever you can find for cheap. And with that, the gear is completely wrapped up. It's time for us to move into the skills and links that make this build truly function. And we'll begin, of course, with our core chest piece based cast on critical strike setup, which is going to be a 6-link composed first of Cyclone, combined with cast on critical strike, which will automatically trigger supported spells when we critical strike an enemy using the linked attack skill, being Cyclone in this case, and causes those triggered spells to deal 39% more damage at level 20. And as that triggered spell in the core 6-link, we're going to be placing Vol Ice Nova. This will cause the cast on critical strike setup to auto-cast the generic Ice Nova, not the Vol form. The Vol form is up to us to manually cast, but if we're continuously attacking an enemy, we can be triggering an automatic Ice Nova every 0.15 seconds with no cooldown reduction. And with our 4th link, increased critical strike support, which at level 20 will add 1.9% to the base critical strike chance of both Cyclone and Ice Nova, as well as increasing the critical strike chance of both of those skills by 94%. This gem is our single biggest boost to our critical strike chance. With this support, and everything running in the build as it should, we'll be critical striking with Cyclone over 96% of the time, and hitting critical strikes 100% of the time with our main Ice Novas. For our 5th link, we're going to be working hard to increase the damage of our Ice Novas. We're going to be utilizing Concentrated Effect Support. At level 20, it grants us 54% more area damage, but causes supported skills to have 30% less area of effect. This increases both the damage of our Cyclone and our Ice Novas, but also reduces their area of effects pretty drastically. But this trade-off is so worth it, because it gives us our biggest single boost from one gem, increasing the damage of our Ice Novas very drastically. And to push that damage even further, for our 6th and final link, we'll be utilizing Hypothermia. Its minor effects grant us increased effective chill and an increased chance to freeze enemies that are chilled. However, that's basically pointless for this build, as critical strikes will always freeze enemies that can be frozen, meaning we're going to be freezing everything that we come into contact with, as we're going to be hitting critical strikes almost all the time. But primarily, Hypothermia will grant us at level 20 39% more damage with hits against chilled enemies. Basically, anything we hit is going to be chilled, and any enemy that we've frozen is also considered chilled, meaning that we get a huge damage bonus from the 6th and final link. With this setup, we'll be constantly critical striking with Cyclone, which will automatically cast Ice Novas around our character in nearby Frostbolt projectiles, shattering everything in its wake. We can also utilize manually the Vol Ice Nova portion of this skill. It will gain all the benefits from the Hypothermia, the concentrated effect, and the increased critical strikes, and will create a rippling massive chain explosion of Ice Novas that can decimate huge portions of Legions, Breaches, and Blights, and we'll be utilizing our 2 Cospris Malices to trigger a variety of cold spells that will increase the potency and effectiveness of each of those Ice Novas. In the first Cospris, we're going to be utilizing the Curse Frostbite at a high level, around 20 or 21. At level 20, Frostbite causes cursed enemies to have minus 44% to their cold resistance, giving our Ice Novas an absurd DPS boost of around 24% against normal enemies, 20% against normal bosses, and around 11% against Shaper and his Guardians. We're also going to have Frostbite linked to increased area of effect and to Frost Bomb, with the increased area of effect gem increasing the AoE of both of these skills by up to 49% at level 20. Frost Bomb pulses with cold multiple times before exploding, dealing cold damage to nearby enemies, reducing their ability to regenerate both energy shield and life, and inflicting upon them cold exposure, which reduces their cold resistance by an additional 25%, with both of these skills benefiting heavily from the increased area of effect support. When we hit a melee critical strike with Cyclone, this specific Cospris Malice will select one of these 2 spells to cast, with this cast occurring at the very spot our character is standing when it triggers, either cursing enemies in a huge area around our character with Frostbite or triggering Frost Bomb, inflicting all nearby enemies with cold exposure. And we'll be hitting so many critical strikes with Cyclone that you should be putting down enough Frostbites and Frost Bombs to inflict just about every enemy you encounter and every boss with both effects, lowering their cold resistance by as much as 70%, massively increasing our damage against all targets. And for the second Cospris Malice, we're going to be utilizing Frostbolt, linked to Ice Nova, linked to Ice Bite support. This causes us to trigger additional Ice Novas and to send out Frostbolt projectiles from our character's location that both the Ice Novas from our main setup and from this Cospris setup can trigger off of, which drastically increases their reach and their ability to clear packs. And adding Ice Bite to the links allows us to increase the cold damage that both of these skills do, and generates frenzy charges consistently while mapping when we kill frozen enemies, granting us, when we have all 3 frenzy charges up, 12% increased attack speed, and we do 12% more damage in general, affecting all of our skills and giving us a really nice DPS boost. And that covers the 2 Cospris Malice setups. Next up, we're going to have the aura selection for the build. It's going to be a 4-link composed of Herald of Ice, an Enlighten level 2 to 4, Hatred, and a Precision at as high a level as you can run without reserving too much mana. Herald of Ice grants us extra cold damage to spells and to attacks, and causes an explosion to trigger every time we shatter a frozen enemy. Hatred simply improves upon the amount of cold damage that we do. If we were doing physical damage with the build, it would give us 25% of that as extra cold, but we don't. But what it does do is grant us a raw 18% more cold damage, giving us a very noticeable increase to our DPS. Finally, Precision at a high level plays a very important role in this build, granting us much needed critical strike chance and accuracy rating, improving both the critical strike chance of our Cyclone and our spells, and making it substantially more likely for our Cyclone to hit its targets. And we'll be linking all 3 of these to an Enlighten between level 2 and level 4 depending on your budget. It simply reduces the amount of mana reservation that these auras take from us, increasing the amount of mana that we have available to spend on skills. It is, however, not required whatsoever and is merely a convenience thing. Our Cyclone costs almost nothing to channel, and our auto-cast spells don't take any mana from us, so you shouldn't be running into issues with mana too often. We'll be regenning plenty of mana. It shouldn't be an issue for you. If you truly have any sort of problem, just pick up Mind Drinker, spend the 2 points, and you should be good to go. Next up, we've got our utility and movement skill setup. None of these gems interact with each other in any meaningful way, so you can have them linked, unlinked, it doesn't matter. I just put all 4 of them here in one item. First up, we've got a simple portal. Removes the need to have portal scrolls in your inventory and is just a very nice quality of life gem to have. In the second slot, we're going to have Flame Dash, which I don't actively use as a movement skill in this build very often due to our high movement speed capabilities. However, it's super nice to have in the build to phase through objects, dodge attacks, and traverse gaps in the map. But when you're really trying to move around the map, in our third slot, we have Withering Step. A really fantastic, and in my opinion, superior option to using Phase Run. Withering Step automatically resets any elusive buff we currently have and replaces it with a brand new one that has increased effect from the Withering Step gem, which at the peak of its elusive effect will grant us 67% increased movement speed, and it will decline from there. Using this in conjunction with our Quicksilver Flask allows us to have access to a huge movement speed bonus instantly, and it also grants you facing as well, which can help you escape from a really bad situation. However, it's important to keep in mind that Withering Step's elusive effect will be cancelled whenever you use a different skill, which suits us just fine, because by the time you reach that next pack and you want to use Cyclone again, Withering Step will have spent a huge portion of its buff and will be much less effective. Thus, as soon as you attack, you can replace its buff with a brand new elusive buff from Mistwalker, a really fantastic movement skill and one that I can't recommend enough for this build. And finally, for the fourth spot, we're going to be utilizing Vol Grace, which simply grants us, in key moments, additional chance to dodge attack and spell hits, and does some serious work in helping us to reach that cap of 75%. Keep in mind that we're not utilizing the normal Grace aura portion of this, we're only using the Vol Grace skill that it provides. Use this in any situation when you're getting into close combat with a lot of enemies or really powerful enemies. And with that covered, it's time to discuss the final gem setup that we have in the build. This is going to vary a little bit because if you're using Command of the Pit, you might have less available sockets for gems. So my core recommendation for anybody, regardless of what gloves you're using, is going to have a Steel Skin at level 19, linked to a cast when damage taken support at level 17. This will automatically cast the Steel Skin buff for us whenever we take a total of 2,621 damage. Steel Skin at these levels, when the buff is up, can take an additional 1,946 damage that we would have taken ourselves. We'll still be taking some damage, but 70% of the damage that we're receiving from hits is going to be taken from the Steel Skin buff before it's taken from us. And we have these gems at these levels because cast when damage taken support only triggers supported gems when they require an appropriate level that is equivalent to or less than the required level of cast when damage taken itself. By itself, this is already a great 2-link setup, but if you have extra sockets available, you can add a Summon Ice Golem at level 17 and an increased duration support at any level. Both of these are very optional. The increased duration support simply means that the Steel Skin buff will be active a little bit longer, and adding the Summon Ice Golem to the links will cause it to be automatically summoned when we take substantial damage. The Golem grants us both increased critical strike chance and accuracy, both things we can always use more of, and having it cast automatically means that we don't have to be concerned about it. It will just be consistently up while mapping and facing bosses. As we take damage, it will be recast even if it dies. So go ahead and tailor the setup depending on what kind of gloves you decide to pick up and how many sockets you have available. And with that, all of our skills and links are covered, and it's time for us to move into the Bandit Choice for the build. And as per usual, the choice is split between helping Alira and killing all of the bandits. This really does come down purely to personal preference, as we can use all the points we can get our hands on, but everything that Alira offers is truly beneficial to the build in this situation. We can use the mana regeneration, the critical strike multiplier is amazing for all of our skills, and gaining those extra resistances is always convenient. I almost always prefer just getting the 2 points for the build. but in this case, I think a Lyra is the most powerful choice. Next up is going to be the Pantheon selection. And for the Major God, for me it comes down to a clear pick of Soul of Lunaris, granting us additional physical damage reduction and movement speed for each nearby enemy. The majority of combat with this build is in very close proximity to our enemies, meaning that we're getting a lot of benefit from these two stats. And if you choose to capture additional souls, you'll be gaining additional chance to avoid projectile damage, dodge attacks and spells, and avoid projectiles that have chained. This Major God provides us with a lot of really good benefits, and I would recommend capturing all 3 additional souls. And for the Minor God, I genuinely think you can go in whatever direction you want here, but I would highly recommend getting Soul of Grukon, granting us additional attack evasion and also giving us a boost to our movement speed at almost all times once we've captured the Stalker of the Endless Dunes. 2 quality of life bonuses that are really nice to have for the build. Next up, we're going to talk really quickly about the Assassin Ascendancy and what order you might want to take those Ascendancies in. My recommendation for the first Ascendancy is to pick up Opportunistic, which, unlike other Ascendancies we'll be picking up later on, doesn't require us to be hitting critical strikes. It primarily grants us with that 20% increased movement speed if we've killed recently, as well as a 20% more damage multiplier when there's at least one rare or unique enemy nearby, which will be happening a lot. And in situations where we're facing multiple rares or uniques, we'll be taking reduced damage. But during the leveling process, this more damage multiplier and the increased movement speed is super nice for just leveling smoother and getting through the core chunk of the game faster. For the second Ascendancy, I would recommend getting Unstable Infusion to grant us permanent access to power charges in just about every single situation imaginable. And it inherently raises our base maximum power charges from 3 to 4. Each power charge granting us 40% increased critical strike chance. So with no investment in the tree, we'll have 4 of those up at almost all times, granting us 160% increased critical strike chance. And through the tree, we'll be picking up 3 more maximum power charges, bringing our total to 7. Thus, when we end up getting to our third Ascendancy, we'll be hitting critical strikes fairly frequently at that point, making this in my mind a really good time to pick up Mistwalker, because to have that elusive buff up, we have to be hitting those crits. And as I previously covered, Mistwalker will be granting us elusive with tons of attack speed, movement speed, attack and spell dodge, reduced damage taken, and no extra damage taken from critical strikes. An absolute monster of an Ascendancy node, and arguably one of the best in the entire game. And from there, all that leaves is our fourth and final Uber Lab. When you reach this point, you'll want to pick up Deadly Infusion, because by the time you've reached the final labyrinth, you're going to have the majority of the skill tree fairly fleshed out, meaning that you'll have access to as many power charges as you're ever going to get. Deadly Infusion granting us 8% to critical strike multiplier for each power charge that we have up. We should have 7 maximum power charges, granting us 56% to critical strike multiplier. It also grants us 2% to our base critical strike chance and 10% increased movement speed when we have maximum power charges. Due to Unstable Infusion, this will be at virtually all times, while mapping and against bosses. Deadly Infusion is really strong and gives us a massive boost to our critical strike chance, multiplier, and some nice movement speed on top of that. So in summary, my recommendation is to pick up Opportunistic, then Unstable Infusion, followed by Mistwalker, and then Deadly Infusion for the Uber Lab. But you can customize this however you see fit. It's time for us to take a look at the passive skill tree and give some recommendations for early paths and nodes to prioritize during the leveling process. I'm also going to be including a secondary skill tree in the path of building. The secondary skill tree will feature less points and will specifically focus on what a character should be picking up early on in the leveling process. The route we took on the skill tree has a few main objectives. Offensively, we're trying to scale a few different forms of damage, being area damage, spell damage, elemental damage, and cold damage, as well as increasing the area of effect of our skills and increasing the critical strike chance and multiplier of said skills. The most crucial offensive nodes to the build are going to include Assassination, Doomcast, Throat Seeker, and each of the 3 power charge nodes. We're also investing in increasing the area of effect of our skills, utilizing Amplify, Blast Radius, and a Lethal Assault, as well as smaller contributions from a variety of other nodes, such as Trickery, Snowforged, Frostwalker, and Light of Divinity. And defensively on the tree, we're going to be focusing on stacking as much life as possible and also increasing our chance to dodge both spell and attack hits, with a required sub-focus of picking up as much dexterity and intelligence as possible in order to equip our swords, Cospris Malices require 212 dexterity and 257 intelligence to equip, and honestly is pretty far from a lenient requirement and necessitates a fair amount of investment in the tree. We'll also be incidentally scaling some energy shield, with any energy shield that ends up in the build just being a nice bonus for us. Our crucial defensive nodes are going to include Blood Siphon, Blood Drinker, Ridden in Blood, Cruel Preparation, Melding, Quick Recovery, Discipline and Training, and Devotion. As you can see, we spend a lot of points picking up life in this build. If you're running lower tier content and you don't feel you need this much life, one of the first things to go should absolutely be dropping the 4 points of melding and investing in more DPS. However, if you're trying to push later game content, we're going to need all the life that we can get. Other crucial defensive nodes are going to of course be Acrobatics and Phase Acrobatics, as that entire line will completely grant us all of the dodge chance we'll be getting from the entire tree. We're also going to be getting dexterity and intelligence from many places on the tree, but I found that even with all of my investment in gear, I still needed to pick up this additional dexterity node right here. And finally, we're going to be investing in the utility of 5 different jewel sockets in these locations. We have 2 unique jewels, the first of which being the Tempered Mind. This one should absolutely go into this location right here. This is in order to gain the maximum accuracy boost that we can get from one spot. And our second unique jewel, Frozen Trail, which is intended to impact the functionality of our frost bolts, can be placed into any of these jewel sockets and it will function just fine. With all of that said, I like to make an important disclaimer whenever I cover a skill tree. These are my best recommendations, but are not the set in stone, concrete best way to make this build. If you think I forgot something or you want to make a major change to the build, go for it. Figure out what you can sacrifice and make it happen. You may very well find a way to get the build working even better, so don't be afraid to change things up however you like. With that said, the skill tree is covered and it's time to move on to our final stop, where I'll be discussing leveling gear, gems, and tips. And we'll begin first with the leveling gems that you'll want to be using when getting this character started. Due to the nature of Cospris Malice not being equipable until level 68, and the variety of gems and sockets required to run our main cast on critical strike setup, I'm going to be advising using a completely different spellcaster based setup until we can reach level 68. We're going to want to focus on leveling this character using either Freezing Pulse or Frostbolt. They are very similar skills in their base functionality and can be scaled in many of the same ways. Both of these spells are available to you immediately after completing the first quest in the game, with Freezing Pulse being presented to you as a quest reward and Frostbolt being immediately available for purchase from Nessa. I would try these 2 skills out for yourself and see which one you prefer to level with most. You'll want to be supporting those spells with these support gems as you get them. Added cold damage support, faster casting support, arcane surge support, Controlled Destruction support before we start stacking a lot of crit chance, and as you start hitting higher levels, picking up Hypothermia support and Spell Echo support. You can also choose to run lesser or greater multiple projectiles, but I feel that it's quite unnecessary, as with both of these skills, you can pick up 2 unique gems for extremely cheap, for Freezing Pulse being First Snow, and for Frostbite being Frozen Trail. Both of these gems will increase the amount of projectiles that these skills cast, and give them a boost to usability. During the leveling process, I would recommend getting jewel sockets as soon as possible, and socketing in 2 copies of the unique jewel that benefits the skill you choose. Early on, you'll also want to be picking up Herald of Ice, Hatred, and eventually getting a low-level Precision that you can level up later on. And for those of you having mana-based issues, we have a lot of gear solutions coming up to solve that problem, but you can also consider running a Clarity. As you level up, you'll also want to be picking up Flame Dash and Withering Step as your movement skills to help you get through the leveling process a little bit quicker. And finally, give some consideration to picking up Frostbite the Curse and Frost Bomb the spell when they become available to you. You'll have to manually cast these during the leveling process, but enemies affected by these skills will have massively reduced cold resistance, greatly increasing the damage that you can do to them. You'll want to be utilizing these skills to get yourself all the way up to level 68, when you can finally equip 2 Cospris Malices, and switch over to the gem setups that included for both of those weapons, as well as finally switching to the full cast on critical strike setup that we have in our chest piece. At this point, you'll be wanting to switch over to Cyclone, and you'll be working towards all of the skills and links that I included in the main section, and piecing together the endgame gear. But first, we should talk about the gear that's going to get you to that point. Here are my top recommendations for the leveling gear to get this build going. If this is your very first character of the league, or first character ever, you can mostly just ignore this section and level naturally, using gear that the game drops for you. However, if this is not your first character, here's some gear that I would recommend to speed up the leveling process and make you much more powerful early on. with my first and foremost recommendation being the moderately priced Tabula Rasa. This is a 6-link that can be equipped at level 1 with all white sockets, meaning that you can socket in whatever type of gem you want. If you have the money to afford this item, it doesn't get any better than this and will boost your power from moment 1 all the way until you can switch into your endgame armor. Next up is the cheap helmet Gold Rim, which grants you a huge bonus to elemental resistances and is equipable very early. For the gloves, I would recommend the Loctonio Caress, as they are very cheap and equipable quite early. They grant you a big chunk of cast speed, some life, and inconsistent access to power, frenzy, and endurance charges on kill. For the boots, I can't recommend Wanderlust more. They are cheap and equipable at level 1 and grant you 20% movement speed, immunity to freeze, and regenerate a bunch of mana, with the mana regeneration and movement speed being unbelievably helpful during the leveling process. For the amulet, I highly recommend Itziri's Foible. Very cheap and gives you a huge chunk of mana and a ton of mana regeneration rate, as well as making all of your items and gems easier to equip by lowering their attribute requirements. If you're having no issues equipping items or with mana regeneration, Kairoi Ward is a fantastic and cheap alternative that will boost your damage and the capability of your projectiles. For the rings, I would recommend going with 2 cheap Horrendous Signets. These can be equipped immediately and grant you experience gain, which is a very rare stat in Path of Exile, and also grant you a ridiculous amount of mana regeneration rate, going a very long way to immediately shoring up any of the mana issues you might have had with the build. For the weapons, I would recommend dual wielding either wands or scepters. At level 1, you can equip 2 Life Sprig wands for very cheap. I would use those for as long as you can, but if you want to make an upgrade, you can pick up 2 Tollborns for cheap at level 24, or hold off for a few more levels and pick up a single Bitter Dream for very cheap. You'll only want to be wielding one of these, and in your other hand you can have either a Life Sprig or a Tollborn. Bitter Dream is an absurdly strange and powerful leveling option, and grants you instant access to what is essentially a 9-link, something almost unheard of in Path of Exile. You can have 3 sockets in the weapon that are all linked, and here you can put your main spell skill, either Freezing Pulse or Frostbolt, and have it linked to something like Controlled Destruction and Spell Echo. That 3-link you just created will also be supported by Hypothermia, Ice Bite, Cold Penetration, Mana Leech, added cold damage, and inspiration support, creating an extremely souped up version of whatever skill you're using. This is a fantastic budget option for those who don't have the money for a Tabula Rasa. However, keep in mind that this will make your main skill quite expensive to cast, so you're going to want to have some of that mana regeneration gear that I talked about previously. So in summary, you'll either want to be running a Tabula Rasa and then dual wielding either Life Sprigs or Tollborns, or if you have no Tabula or just want to give it a shot, wield 1 Life Sprig or 1 Toolborn with a Bitter Dream as your main setup. These weapons should carry you all the way until level 68 until you can make the full switch to the Cospris Malices in the Cast on Critical Strike setup. You shouldn't run into any issues, but if you need to make further upgrades to the weapons, feel free to do so. Early on, you'll want to be picking up a couple of different flasks. You'll want to be getting a Quicksilver flask as soon as possible, if not even running 2 of them. It also gives some heavy consideration to picking up a Wise Oak very early on. You can get these for quite cheap and will increase your damage, reduce the damage you take, and also give you a big boost to your resists, which you'll be needing during the leveling process. And with that, I feel that my coverage of the leveling gems and gear is complete, which finally brings us to the very end conclusion of the build. Both Cyclone and Assassin's recent changes have made this a fast, smooth, and extremely satisfying build to play, with our 3 different Cast on Critical Strike setups shattering everything we come up against. This is honestly, without a doubt, been one of my favorite builds I've played so far, and if you've never given a Cast on Critical Strike build a shot before, Assassin has found itself in an incredible spot after the 3.8 update, making this a fantastic time to give this build a shot, and I highly recommend it. And finally, if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I want to give a huge thank you to the community surrounding this channel for all the continued positivity, feedback, and support on the videos. The growth the channel has seen so far has honestly been absurd, and I couldn't be more excited to make more Path of Exile content. So if you found this video helpful or enjoyed, please consider subscribing for more Path of Exile build guides and tutorials just about every single week. And of course, if you got any feedback or questions for me, just leave it down below and I'll do my best to answer. As always, I've been Esro, and I will see you guys in the next video.